Holy shit. Shoulder. Come on. Fuck you. Okay. That was so scuffed, but what the hell? Yo guys, what is up? Max on our first Descendant video, and today we're going over my updated guide to Viessa. Now, I posted a previous Viessa build that had a bunch of Transcendent mods on it. At the time, I didn't have Cold Snap Watch, so part of this update is we are going to be having a Cold Snap Watch Viessa build, which I think is one of her best mobbing Transcendent modules, and we're also updating the other builds. As you probably know, with the new changes to Catalyst, you can min-max your builds, and Viessa has a ton of different Transcendent modules that change the way that her abilities work, and sometimes they're even tags on how they function. And so now with the Catalyst update, I found a way to maximize all of her different Transcendent modules without having to spend too many Catalysts. I hope you guys enjoy the full build breakdown. Let's get right into it. So the first thing to talk about is Viessa's Transcendent modules. Now, a lot of characters have one, maybe two Transcendent modules that are good on her. Viessa genuinely has a lot, and a lot that are very good, and they're good at different scenarios. For this build video, we're going to be focusing on, in my opinion, her top three, which are going to be Cold-Bloodedness. Cold-Bloodedness gives her the highest cooldown in the game. You're able to spam your 4 ability and all of your abilities. Viessa is very much an ability caster. She does 99% of her damage from her abilities, and so Cold-Bloodedness really enables that playstyle. And if you're going to get one mod and really focus on it, I'd recommend focusing on Cold-Bloodedness. It's not only her best in slot bossing mod, in my opinion, but it's also really great for mobbing because you can just spam out your skills, which we'll have a build for. Her other two mods that we're going to be talking about are Cold Snap Watch. Cold Snap Watch allows Viessa to create these cold zones that span a very large area, and they make her one of the best, if not the best, spawn killer when it comes to doing farming where you're killing a bunch of ads that are in the same place. Cold Snap Watch is incredibly powerful, and so we've got a build just focused on using this mod. And then the last one is Absolute Zero. Absolute Zero focuses on her high base crit chance, where you're going to be constantly critting enemies, and you can constantly inflict frostbite. This is her most run and gun or run and skill cast setup, where you're going to be able to run around with your frost roads active, leaving dot damage on the ground that will just kill enemies. It kind of turns Viessa into a Valby type character where you just run by enemies and they will die as you're running by them. And this is a really fun mod. We're not going to be talking too much about Hypothermia, Glacial Cloud, or Cold Cohesion, just because I simply don't think that they are worth investing into. If you are looking for a Hypothermia build, I made one in the previous, but I've since moved away from it just because I don't think it's a great option compared to her others. Now let's talk builds. Usually we would do reactors and weapons first, but the weapons and reactors you use, because one of the interesting things about Viessa is her Transcendent mods genuinely change her abilities, and she's got some that are fusion, some that are tech. If you go Absolute Zero, everything changes to singular. If you go Cold Snap, you're focusing on fusion, and if you're gonna go Cold-Bloodedness but you're not going to go for bossing, then you don't want a tech reactor, you're gonna want a fusion reactor. So Viessa's reactor situation is a little bit more complicated. We'll talk about it at the end of the video and some of her best weapons when we get into more bossing and mobbing stuff. But I wanted to talk about her bossing setup first. This is prioritizing and focusing on spamming her Blizzard. This is her best ability. It is going to put down a Blizzard that does a ton of damage for a continuous amount of time, and then when it's over, it's going to do a burst explosion that does a ton of damage. And one of the important things to get on this is, one, the placement and the timing of it. With this setup, you're really going to want to place down your 4th ability when a boss is down. That will give you Dangerous Ambush, which will give you another 50% skill power. on it, and so timing your placement on this is pretty important, but it's on such a low cooldown that there's a trick that you can do that I was utilizing. You might have seen it in some of the intro clips where you can put down a 4 and time it so that it explodes as a boss is spawning, and then immediately have another 4, so you get that like explosion, that burst damage with a 1,845 multiplier, and then you can go right into a 1,435 modifier, and this will lead to very fast boss downs. And then with your cold-blooded buff up, you can just spam your 1 and 3. Another thing that's really important about Viessa to understand is how good her 1 is at destroying the like weak points on bosses. Almost every boss has, when they go into a like immune phase, they've got like a thing on their back, or maybe it's on their gun where you need to break it, and normally you use guns to break it. Viessa is really good at just spamming her frost shards on a like 1 second cooldown to do AoE damage to break those things. So if you're doing any boss where you kind of like need help with breaking those parts on bosses, Viessa's incredibly powerful at it. Now, for the most important mods on this, we're going to be making sure that we have tons of cooldown with nimble fingers and MP conversion. We're also going focus on chill for even more cooldown. We're going to be going for 4 crit mods: Frontlines, emergency measures, skill insight, and skill concentration. Viessa has pretty good base crit currently on her. We're able to get to 46% crit hit rate, which is pretty nice. If you get like a crit hit on your reactor, you get over 50% with almost a like 3.7 times multiplier on them. So we're pretty heavily leaning into crit. You don't technically need a range mod for Viessa for bossing, but I think the quality of life is really important because, you know, if a boss starts walking away from your 4, you lose a lot of damage. So technically, you could use like a spear and shield mod here and get a little bit more damage, but I'd much rather have the like range ability so that you don't have to like perfectly place your 4 every single time. Now, for bossing, I strongly recommend using the Secret Garden. This is Viessa's best bossing weapon over the Clairvoyance, simply because the Secret Garden has the special unique ability for pest control. This reads that whenever you use a tech skill, which your 4th is, which is on a less than 7-second cooldown, you have a 50% chance to proc skill power. You're able to proc this relatively often with Viessa if you spec her right, which can lead up to like over 36% increased skill damage, which is massive. That's like almost down on a boss in terms of like a buff of your damage. So Secret Garden is fantastic. Unfortunately, I didn't have a Secret Garden reactor for any of the kills, and you can't like pre-stack it and swap off of it. So I was missing a ton of damage, and I could have had like 30+% more damage on our boss kills. Our next build is for Absolute Zero. This is, in my opinion, one of the most fun Viessa builds you can run. I kind of want to show off how this works. So let's spawn in some ads. Obviously, Viessa, lots of skills. For her like Absolute Zero, the most fun skill is her Frost Roads. This is going to give her a speed buff, right? But you leave this trail that actually deals damage with Absolute Zero. And it does quite a bit of damage. So as we hit these enemies and as they get crit, they're going to apply their like frostbitten status, and you can just run by enemies and kill them. Obviously, if something is more tanky, you can use your other skills, which we've got on really low cooldowns. But the big thing is you're kind of constantly keep up a movement speed buff that is going to one-shot most enemies while it's proccing. The one thing to note about our Absolute Zero is it reads, when using skills, Ice Shackle is not inflicted when the skill lands a critical hit. Inflict Frostbite. In order for the most consistent uptime and DPS with Absolute Zero, we are going to want to focus on crit hit damage, or sorry, crit hit chance. Damage is obviously nice, but we want to make sure that we're critting fairly often to be able to apply all of our Frostbite and deal all of our damage that we're working towards. And so with this, we're going to be rocking the 3 crit mods that give crit rate. So we've got Frontlines, emergency measures, and skill insight. That's going to be really nice for us. We've got 1 skill range expansion. The reason that I'm only using 1 range mod is because the 2 only scales up to 200% max expandable. That's 100% plus our 92, so we're only like 8% off max range for our 2, which is the main ability. So we don't really need more range mods than this. That's kind of what we're going towards. MP Collector for the ability to get mana as we're mobbing. We're going to want to be using all of our skills fairly often. MP Conversion and Nimble Fingers so that we have as much cooldown as possible. And then we've got Focus on Chill and Focus on Singular for extra damage and more cooldown. The one thing that's super nice about Absolute Zero is it changes all of your skills to singular, where normally they're split with different types. And so getting a singular chill reactor and being able to buff up all of your abilities and use all of them equally is fantastic and makes this playstyle really satisfying. Next up, we've got Cold Snap Watch. Cold Snap Watch changes Viessa's 3 ability. Instead of it being like a impact damage that just hits enemies and then stops, it hits enemies and leaves a like damage over time effect on the ground. The range of it is actually very, very nice, as it can go quite far and it stacks. So you can cover a large area in just kind of constant damage. This is what we use to farm, like if you wanted to, for example, farm like the Valby run, you can do it on Viessa with Cold Snap Watch. Currently, one of the fastest ways to level up in the entire game is doing this defense line Void Fragment with Cold Snap Watch Viessa. You can level your weapons to like level 20 or level 40 in like 22 minutes doing this. So if you're looking for a build to like level your weapons really quickly, the Cold Snap Watch build is what I would recommend. And there's a few interesting things that we're doing here that I kind of want to explain. So the first thing is we're going to be killing enemies a lot of the times if we're using this build to kill enemies off spawn, which Dangerous Ambush actually works on. So you're getting another like 25% damage with Dangerous Ambush, which is pretty fantastic. The other thing that we are using that's also a little bit interesting is we're going to be using a low ranked maximize range. You really want to get max range on this. And if we use a full ranked maximize range, let's just take that off for a second. If we used a full rank maximize range, we are going to be at 286% max range. The max expendable range is 250%, right? So we don't benefit from going over that, but we're losing modifier. The higher our like mod is, the more modifier that we lose, and it's on a low modifier skill, so we do want to like make sure that we're dealing as much damage as possible. And if we use, for example, amplification control, this only gives us 51%, so we are 6% like missing on skill effect range, which I was like, oh, that's fine, we just missed 6%. And then one of the farms that I was doing, like my damage was just not quite reaching far enough. So what we've been using is a lower rank maximize range. This is going to get me to 255%. I lose less damage, but I'm still capping my range out. So that's why we're using a low maximize range. Dangerous Ambush is going to be used to spawn kill enemies. It procs on enemies that are spawning. We've got as much cooldown as possible with Focus on Chill and Focus on Fusion with MP Conversion and Nimble Fingers. And another thing that we're going to be using here that's a little bit different is we're going to be using Skill Extension. Your damage does stack, and so you're wanting to keep up these as much as possible. You can have, I believe it's 3 of these active at a time with this setup, and so Skill Extension helps us cover more area with the build, which is very nice. It's not something I would use elsewise, but because we're specifically just trying to kill things while they're spawning, Skill Extension is great. It also lets us kill more enemies with our Blizzard, because that's going to have some extra ticks and be up for longer. And lastly, we've got the Bloody Mobbing build. This is if you want to play Viessa with Cold-Bloodedness, which allows her to spam her abilities on like 1-second cooldowns and have the fastest cooldown on any character in the game. You can use Cold-Bloodedness, but for this setup, we're not focusing on using the 4. What we're focused on is keeping up our buff and spamming our 1 and 3 and the 4, obviously, but we're just not like spec'd for bossing. It's still pretty insane to be able to use her 4th ability on a 7-second cooldown. It's even less than 7 seconds because this isn't taking into account the 20% cooldown that Cold-Bloodedness procs with. But with this setup, we're just focusing on spamming. So we've got, for example, we're going to be using maximize conservation so that we get a little bit more skill cost. The modifier here doesn't matter because we have like ginormous modifiers on all of our skills. We're going to be using that maximize range trick that we talked about because all of her things here are 250%. So we don't need more range than this like sub-ranked maximize range. We're also going to be going for two crit mods because crit is really great for scaling her abilities. She has a ton of crit chance inherently. And then we've also got as much mana as we can get with MP Collector so that we're able to sustain MP Collector plus maximize conservation plus the MP cost decrease of the 20% that you inherently get from Cold Bloodedness will allow you to just spam like crazy. And this is a very, very fun setup to use. Now to talk about the rest of the stuff on Viessa, we've got weapons first. We kind of already mentioned Cold Bloodedness spam with the Secret Garden. That applies to both mobbing and bossing. If you are using your 4 consistently enough, the Secret Garden will just be the best weapon for her. You also have the Clairvoyance, which you can use for mobbing, but you don't really need to. The Clairvoyance will debuff enemies slow resistance, and this is a solid option on her. It's not as good as the Secret Garden for bossing, but it will chill enemies and freeze them in place if you want more of that, and it's definitely her most on theme weapon. So if you're looking for a weapon to use kind of all around for both mobbing and bossing, the Clairvoyance is a good choice. The last option to talk about is the Blue Beetle. Now the Blue Beetle increases your crit chance. Unfortunately, Blue Beetle only buffs your your base crit chance rather than your final crit chance. So if I have like a max rank Blue Beetle giving me like 30% crit chance, it's not actually 30% crit chance. I won't get like 30% increased crit off of my 50%. I'm getting 30% increase off of my 15 base, and it does not factor in any crit increases. So the most you're going to get out of a max rank Blue Beetle is a plus 4.5% crit hit rate on Viessa. So it's definitely something that you can hold to buff her abilities, but its increase is kind of negligible. Just kind of wanted to break it down. So in terms of like, tier for Viessa, this is how I'd rank them. Secret Garden, best weapon for her, followed by the Clairvoyance, followed by the Blue Beetle. And those are her weapons. Next, we get to talk about reactors. Now, Viessa has a lot of reactors that she wants for a lot of different builds. One thing that I did not have for this video was a lot of reactors for a lot of her builds. I don't have a fusion one for Cold Snap Watch. My bossing one is bad. The only one that I technically have like a good one for was Absolute Zero, and that's just because it's for singular, and I farmed for like singular ones for Haley. Showing on screen right now is like the god rolls for each of the builds that I've listed. So you've got the god roll on the left for bossing, and then for the Absolute Zero, and then for the Cold Snap Watch, and then for the cold-blooded mobbing setup. Figured that would be easier just because I don't have really great reactors, and a visual of all of the different roles and what the things you're looking for I thought would be pretty helpful. For her components, for like general play, I'd recommend 2-piece Polar, 2-piece Annihilation. This is going to give you increased duration for things like your Frost Roads, which makes you faster, things like your Cold Snap Watch, so that it ticks more, things like your 4, so that you get extra damage out of it. Annihilation is just kind of nice quality of life on her. And then 2-piece Polar gives her more chill skill power, which is very nice. And you can rock these setup and get basically all HP ones. I'm currently just not taking off this Annihilation sensor with max MP recovery in combat and max MP. It's just disgusting. At the end of the day, like having the proper stat rolls or substat rolls will make a much larger increase than having like 2-piece this, 2-piece that, or 4-piece this. Your substat rolls are going to make a world of difference. I strongly recommend looking for everything MP for Viessa. She is a skill spammer. You're going to want MP recovery out of combat on her top piece. I don't have that, but It's going to help a ton. You want MP recovery in combat and max MP on her sensor. You're going to want defense and MP recovery modifier on the memory, and on your processor, doesn't really matter. But your top 3 pieces getting MP will help a ton. Now, for mobbing with absolute zero, you can actually rock 4-piece polar if you wanted to. We were messing around with this. It's interesting. It's not overly impactful. But basically, the absolute zero build inflicts frostbite. When you inflict frostbite on enemies, or defeating enemies that have frostbite inflicted, you have a 30% chance to do 12.2% of an enemy's max HP as damage in a 2.5 meter radius. Gonna be honest, when I messed around with this, I didn't really notice this doing anything, because you're kind of just one-shotting everything with Viessa anyways. Anytime that something's getting procced with frostbite, they're taking more than 100k damage. So I think this is pretty interesting, and it's cool that she's got this synergy. I don't think it's overly impactful. So just like if you go farm this, I don't think you're gonna see it like, oh my god, this is such a game changer. But it is very cool, and it is synergistic with her absolute zero. And lastly, for her bossing components, as with basically every ability-based damage Descendant, you're going to want to rock 4-piece Slayer. The main reason is the 26% increased skill power, and on your Slayer things, try to find, once again, MP rolls. MP recovery out of combat will help you pre-stack the buffs on your Secret Garden. Getting max MP is super important. MP recovery modifier. MP recovery in combat is amazing too. I don't have that, unfortunately. But as many MP rolls on your Slayer set for bossing is going to be fantastic. Guys, that's going to do it for the video. I hope you enjoyed. Viessa is, in my opinion, one of the best mobbing characters in the game. She's incredibly versatile, and she's a really fun character to invest into because she's got a bunch of different playstyles and a bunch of very viable Transcendent modules that you can use. I hope you guys enjoyed the full build breakdown, and let me know what Descendant you'd like to see next. I'll catch y'all in the next one. Guys, take care. Peace.